Hello, everyone. I'm Rick Zanotti, and this is eBizChat, where it's all about business. I am joined today by Dr. Susan Nash. Hey, Susan, how are you?
Oh, today's a great day. So happy to be here. And we have a great guest.
We do. It's Dr. Brian Matthews coming to us from Texas A&M in Texarkana. He's been with us before on a couple of other shows, but this time this is his first appearance on eBizChat, where we're really looking forward to seeing him. Here we go. This show is sponsored by Relate Corporation, Digital Learning, Corporate Video, Learning Design, and Management Consulting. Visit us at www.relatecasts.net. Thanks. This show is sponsored. And we are back. I fumbled it again. What bad finger. Anyway. We're back with Dr. Brian Matthews. He's in that center position of power. He's a great guy. I think you'll enjoy hearing what he has to say, and we need more professors like him out there. Anyway, Susan, would you like to start?
Oh, absolutely. So, Brian, last time you were talking about your research, and you've done a lot of work in areas of leadership and team building and institutional development. I was so interested to hear what you've been working on lately.
Yeah, great question. Thank you so much, Dr. Nash. Always a pleasure to visit you and see you. Always good. Glad to be a part of the show today. I do understand that although I've been a guest before, this is my first appearance on this show, and so definitely looking forward to a great conversation. In terms of research, we're continuing to investigate different variations of leadership. I know we've looked more at a micro level before, but now looking at more of a micro level in terms of leadership styles, leadership innovation, leadership execution. I know before we were looking at just the overall and kind of generic impact of leadership on followers. Now we're looking more into the relational effect and attitudinal effect of leadership on employees that are categorized more theoretically in a out-group dynamic, and what that looks like to invite them into an in-group dynamic. Obviously, we know that there is some subconscious and unconscious engagement that takes place whenever employees are admitted into an in-group. There's levels of trust and pro-social behavior and organizational citizenship and loyalty and privileges and benefits and things of that nature. But we wanted to look at what triggers or what is the impetus, behind encouraging and motivating and admonishing an employee that may theoretically be a member of the out group, how they would be recataloged and be invited into the in group. And so one of the arguments that we pose is a new leadership recommendation. So we know that there's transactional leadership, transformational leadership. There's authentic leadership. I know Rick and I, before you logged on earlier, we were talking about ethics, and so I know there's ethical leadership. There's emancipative leadership, but we wanted to insert a new leadership modality, if you will, which is called trial leadership. And basically, this form of leadership is more of a probationary type of leadership. So it's a varying taxonomy of some of the other leadership principles and constructs that currently exist. But basically, in between out groups and in groups, an employee will matriculate from one to the other, but then there is a intermediate group by which they will figuratively kind of stop at to determine if there is some legitimacy in the invitation from the leader, and then also to determine if they want to admit into the in group. And so not only do we introduce a new leadership concept called trial leadership, but then we also introduce a between group. So you actually have an out group, and then you have a between group, and then you have the in group.
Oh, that's really interesting. Because I'm used to like distributed leadership where people take turns and there's not that intermediate phase. And I'm kind of thinking that that would be really effective in groups where there's there are high stakes in getting admitted to the in group immediately. For example, I'm thinking about this. My brother is currently at the Oklahoma Heart Hospital, and so I was thinking about when I'm visiting him, I'm thinking, wow, these are really high stakes patients where people are in heart failure, etc. And so if you have a new employee or new member of your medical team, um, you want to make sure that they feel comfortable and that, I mean, all the different things. What do you think about that? Is that an example?
Yeah, of course. And so, to your point, there's, great responsibility. There's a high caliber of risk. There's a lot more of, the potential of experiencing vicissitude, unpredictable, situations and scenarios that take place, within this in-group dynamic, that leaders may be well aware of and totally cognizant of, but then those employees that may be matriculating into the in-group may not be well aware or may not be fully knowledgeable of the high stakes that do exist. In this particular article, more granularly, we do talk about this autonomy, whether it is possessed by the leader and or the follower, where there is a decision to accept the invitation or there is a decision to become alienated. So whether they're self-induced, by the follower. So to your point, if I am an employee and if I'm in the out group and I have been invited to be a part of the in group, to be more proximal to the leader, to have more intimate knowledge, to have more of a visceral connection with the leader, there may be certain levels of responsibility that I don't want to assume or that I don't want to adopt, and there may be some risk that I don't want to assume, even if it's calculated risk. So again, the stakes may be too high, the repercussion may be too great. If I do make a mistake, then the onus is on me to be accountable for that mistake. So I may choose to self-alienate, right? So I may choose and make the decision that I don't want to be a part of this dynamic. So the cost-benefit analysis does not necessarily benefit me, so it's not profitable, not necessarily monetarily, but psychologically it may not be profitable. So I may determine at this juncture, within this probationary period, or even if I have partial admittance into an in group, I may decide, that the ability is too great, so I may choose to alienate myself and emancipate from the in group and go back to the out group.
You know what's interesting? As I'm listening to this, it reminds me a lot, and I'm not trying to downplay any of this, but it reminds me a lot of dog training. If you look at how you do dogs, it's socialization. That's one thing, because right now, especially with remote workers, they're not being socialized. So you have the issue of bringing the dog in. Then there's that in-between group. It's called the neutral zone, where you bring one dog with another dog maybe, and they're in kind of a safe zone to see if they can get through that. And eventually, you put them in with the rest of the pack. And it just reminded me of that when you were talking. I was going, that reminds me so much of dog training we've seen or been in the past because of the socialization construct, which, we're more advanced versions of dogs in many ways, but and they're better than we are in some other ways. They just get to know each other friendly and they're done. Life's good. We're a little more complex, but do you see the correlation of what I'm saying? When you said that, I just went, that's fascinating. It's just like dog training, but on a different level.
Yeah, absolutely, and it also parodies, some other, theoretical concepts. I know Dr. Nash had mentioned, teamwork. So, there is a teams are formed, right? So you have, 5 different stages. I know in the management textbooks and in a lot of the literature, there are 4 stages, but in all actuality, there's 5. So you have the forming, storming, norming, performing, and the adjoining stage. With members, whether they voluntarily choose to form or create, this group, for an unofficial or official purpose, then they disperse and go back to their respective areas. But in the forming stage, everyone is friendly, everyone is very cordial, everyone is somewhat communicative because you're trying to, at least establish some degree of comfortability. It may not be unequivocal comfortability, but at least everyone is topical. Everyone is somewhat superficial, not to say that it's disingenuous, but again, you're somewhat reserved. You may be reticent to an extent because you really don't know the individuals who you've been partnered with. But then there's a stage where there's this storming stage, where you're, establishing norms and rules and regulations and governance and you may be vying for, positions. I know you had mentioned me being in the middle and I'm in this position of authority. So, now you have like these personality, conflicts. And so where one individual may be, totally introverted, there may be someone else that's extremely extroverted and charismatic and more, animated and very social. And then you may have other people that are ambiverts. So, they love being around people, at one moment, and then in another moment, they don't want to be around people. Or there may be people that are very contemplative, so they think and they ponder and they evaluate and analyze before speaking. So, so similar to this neutral kind of probationary period, you're dealing with, just multiple dynamics, multiple moving parts. And again, there is a decision that will inevitably be made by both the leader and or the follower. Not to say that one has to make a decision before the other, but again, that decision will determine admittance again into the in group or a decision to, revert back to the out group.
It's interesting because you called it kind of a trial, which in most, it's a probably nicer way of saying a probationary period almost. And I remember in the old days, not that long ago, in government work, for example, or a lot of government, whether it's state, local, or federal, I think there's a year probationary period. And people go, that's a long time. No, it's not. It's actually, from what we've seen in private practice, if we do 3 months, most candidates, good or bad, can fake it for 3 months. You start getting up to 6 months and it's a different candidate. They act differently. They change. They either keep to the same good person you had, or all of a sudden you go, what happened? This person is no longer the person we thought we had. So a year to me, most people can't fake it for a year. I mean, most people can't fake it much past 3 or 4 months. But there is a lot of that. And so I always thought government and had it right in that respect to have a longer period because technically you're looking for people for a lifetime job. So you want to make sure that they can mix and commingle and do everything else that you may not be able to judge in a short period. Do you think a lot of this, Brian, is due to what's going on with remote, where people don't want to go back to work, and yet you're not going to really promote people who are remote all the time. You don't know how they really behave, how they act, what kind of leadership skills they really have totally in a remote kind of format? Or is this kind of something that can be approached both ways, whether it's remote or even people in-house that you're trying to get into different groups or to mix better?
Well, and I think that's a great question. It's very easy for for any individual to arrest who they are, whenever they are remote. So visibly observe personalities, even something as seminal as gestures and being able to really learn gesticulations and being proprioceptive and being able to read body language and just see how people react in different situations, right? And so it may not be as pressurized, or may not be that impressive if you are remote, because you're not around people, so you're not dealing with the constant engagement and those high or those medium to high social exchanges that you would normally see in an in-person setting. So you're really not able to see how a person responds to conflict. And, if they do have great conflict resolution skills, a lot of those soft skills like communications and negotiations, being able to adjust and being able to adapt to different types of personalities and levels of psychological maturity, levels of readiness. So those individuals that are, willing and able, willing and unable, unable and willing, unable and unwilling, how does an individual, adapt and adjust and be agile and be ambidextrous, in those situations. So, I think remote work or this alternative, work site option, may be conducive, for some people that are extremely introverted and they don't do well around people and they want to exercise, what Karl Marx refers to as a lifestyle genius, so they really don't respond well, or they're not profitable in team settings, and maybe being around people creates stress and anxiety. So for those type of individuals, they're probably more productive in a remote setting. And if that's the case, then that's perfectly fine. I think as a leader, you have to be able to decipher what works well for one employee as opposed to another. Again, I think that's a level of acuity and a heightened sensibility that leaders should possess. So again, if I know that Dr. Nash doesn't really do well whenever she works with teams, and maybe she's been traumatized, by being in a
Yes.
team setting before, where she's dealt with, social loafing and fixed mindsets, and there's no growth mindset. So you have persons that are not, willing to be open to experiences, again, so just myriad things, may turn her off, from being around teens. And granted, it could be attributed to other reasons. But again, I think, one of the disadvantages of being remote is that you're not really able to see how people respond in real world situations.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And here's a kind of thinking of a concrete example. Say, for example, I'm being hired on at an organization that's really complex, and I'm thinking, okay, just say like where I am as American Association of Petroleum Geologists, for example, and let's say that there are a lot of things to do in terms of putting on conferences and courses and workshops, and I'm being hired on to help out with promotion. Um, well, okay, so this kind of trial thing, I like the idea of trial because I don't have to be thrown in all the way. It's almost like I'm somewhere in that area between a consultant and also a full time doing everything kind of person. So I can kind of be specialized in my task so I can get confidence because I show my competency and then I can feel comfortable about the people. I mean, I can see how that could really work.
Yeah, of course, and and it's also a way for for the leader to kind of gauge and test, and evaluate, what levels are there of pro-social behavior. So is there extra brand building behavior that's there? Is an individual more independent, interdependent? Do they work well with teams? Do they communicate effectively? Are they proactive? Are they more reactive? So just various things. What motivates them? What demotivates them? Are they intrinsically motivated, extrinsically motivated? As a leader, one would think that a leader would be able to decipher, the duality of job satisfaction and employee morale. So you can have an employee that's satisfied and dissatisfied at the same time, right? So those traditional views of job satisfaction are debunked. Whenever you're able to see, what may intrinsically motivate someone, but then also what extrinsically motivates someone, right? So you have your intrinsic motivators, that speak to or maybe attributed to the absence or presence of job satisfaction, and then your extrinsic motivators, which are attributed to the absence and the presence of job dissatisfaction. So, for example, I can be as a professor, I can absolutely love my job. I'm intrinsically motivated to teach. Would do it without the handsome salary, although the handsome salary is great. But that's not my main, but that's not my main driver and impetus for doing it. But then I may be dissatisfied with, my coworkers, right? So now I'm intrinsically motivated. I'm intrinsically satisfied while, being contemporaneously extrinsically dissatisfied.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, that makes sense.
so question, since we mentioned remote earlier, how do you think remote working has gone? A lot of companies, a lot of managers hate it because there's that lack of control they feel in many cases. Some managers like it. A lot of employees like it. Some hate it because they really miss the social aspects. And it seems like we're torn between a lot of different forces pulling us into that, out of that. How do you think that went as a whole, the remote worker versus going into the office?
I can say from from a student standpoint, and of course we can talk about just traditional employees that are not your traditional student.
Hmm.
I know whenever we transitioned to the modality during COVID, there were students that were already highly attracted to the online modality.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, there's more flexibility, more latitude, more autonomy, more mobility, because I can, access, a classroom at any time, day. So there's not a set time. So there's not a structure or boundaries or parameters, that I'm enveloped by. And then I would imagine that the same, type of response and the same level of comfortability, um, y- can be, said about, just traditional workers. Without having to go into the workplace, I'm not, relegated, to a work environment. I'm not, susceptible to, maybe the attitude and responses of people. I don't have to deal with personalities. I don't have to engage with people. I can still be an employee without being, even proximally, um, connected to my, to my supervisor. Being at home, I'm in a safe place. I'm in my sanctuary, so it gives me some level of serenity. I may feel more empowered because this is a space that I can control, or maybe at work I can't control, what happens. So there is a degree of certainty here, so it mitigates or reduces any risk here at home, as opposed to, being in the workplace. There are so many things uh, that are um, that are common and that are similar, but then there are other things that are very fortuitous. So I would imagine that whenever you did have those workers that now have an option, to work from home, there is kind of like
Mm-hmm.
um, this newfound comfortability, because now I've been exposed to it, where I may not have been exposed to it before, didn't even know that this was even an option before. And I would imagine that, companies are just having to adjust, with this new mode of work.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, I think we've touched on a lot of subjects regarding how to get people working better, the trial version of it, um, and what the end results are. Would love for you to come back on and talk about some of the other things happening in economics, in the industry, because there's a lot. Even I think before the show, we had a conversation. We probably could have had 4 shows out of that. So I think we'd love to have you come back again on the show and discuss some of these in a little more depth, or just hit them real quickly with overviews and then go into more details as to what we're in and what we could be in, where we're going, where we're not going. I'd just love to see you again and talk about that. And Susan, any final comments?
Well, I totally agree. I really think it's interesting, and just to continue this and see where your research goes and more use cases. Then also to, yes, kind of relate it to the overall environment of economic environment and socio-political is really fascinating.
Yeah, not to mention things about supply side issues and
Yeah.
all the other stuff going on. So again, Brian, a pleasure to see you again. We look forward to seeing you very soon. And Susan, as always, it's great to see you. And if you're watching
Thank
the
you.
show, if you have any comments for Brian, leave them down below in the comment section. We'll make sure that he gets them or we get answers from them, and we'll get back to you. Thanks again, everyone, and we will see you next week on eBizChat. Bye, Brian. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap, and we are done.